Hello. Okay, we're going to try and achieve some closure with this module on the UFO issue. We really left a lot of I's undotted and T's uncrossed in those areas, so that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to just start in with the Zoon. We're going to be able to cover UFOs. We'll talk about the Zoon, the living creatures of heaven, but we will not be able to get to crop formations in this module. There's just too much to cover. You could talk for hours about any of these subjects, the pyramid, UFOs, crop formations, etc. So we're going to try and condense it as much as possible. First we'll talk about the Zoon, and Zoon is plural of Zoi, and you have a single Zoi, you have a group of Zoon, and that is Greek, and it's the Greek root from which we get our word zoo, or zoology. And what it means is living creatures that are not human. It means animals. Non-human living creatures is what Zoon means. And when we were talking about the Zoon in the prior module, I was stressing very much that many of the UFOs that are seen are said by the witnesses to be totally silent. And why did we stress the silence? Well, the reason is move your finger, move your wrist, move your elbow, move your shoulder. You should not, unless you have bad arthritis, you shouldn't be hearing any sound. There's God's creatures that He creates tend to be able to achieve movement without sound. Now you might hear a bird's wings, but what you're hearing is actually the wings beating on the air. You're not actually hearing the wing of the bird make any sound. So that is just one more little bit of evidence leaning to the side that many of the things that we see and do not recognize flying in our skies are actually living creatures instead of some type of a mechanical craft. And we discussed that there probably are mechanical craft up there as well. But many of the things we see run silent, and they fly, they can skip through the air, seeming to disappear and appear in another place in the sky. And then when they depart, they tend to fly very vertically and disappear very quickly, virtually in the blink of an eye. There are virtually no way that a solid craft can achieve that kind of flight and that kind of movement. Also, we stressed the crashes of the little metallic craft, normally that have little gray creatures piloting them. We stress the crashes, my friends, because it is intellectually insulting for anyone to assume that there are beings that have the extreme sophistication and intellect to travel between the stars, to navigate between the stars. You know, the star is not where you see it. You see it where it was centuries to millennia ago when the light first started traveling to Earth. But the heavens are in constant movement, and to travel between the stars, you're going to have to know that movement very well and be able to navigate yourself to where the star actually is, not where you're seeing it in the sky. Now, also, you're going to have the power to make a trip that would take us with our fastest mechanical craft. And I'm telling you, they're not moving slow. They are screaming through space, and yet our fastest craft would take 80,000 years to get to the nearest star. So any being that is going to travel from another star to our system is going to have the power to make that trip in a reasonable amount of time. What that tells us, and the reason I stress this, is that if these craft that are crashing, I can promise you, anyone, any being that or group of beings that has the power and the intelligence to travel between the stars can make it across the New Mexico desert without crashing into it. They can make it from Los Angeles to Florida without crashing in to the Texas Panhandle, without crashing into the Mexican interior. They've crashed into the Australian outback. They've crashed into the Russian tundra. They've crashed into the Kecksburg forest. What that tells us is that the things that are crashing definitely are not from some distant star system. If they were from a distant star system, my friends, they would not be crashing into the earth. They would be able to navigate across our lands with no problem and with no issues. Now, the question becomes, if they are not travelers from distant star systems, then what are they and where do they come from? And we've given fairly good evidence about that, and I'm going to tell you that we are coming to the fullness of time, and that is why we stressed also in the last module caution with everything that we see coming out of our skies that we do not understand. We're going to have to be very cautious because we are coming to the fullness of time, and all these things, both the Zoon and anything else coming from our skies, are going to be revealing themselves more and more. Only maybe 5% of the prophecies of the Bible remain unfulfilled. Almost every prophecy in the Bible has come to fulfillment wonderfully and perfectly and right on the bullseye. And we can look for all the other things that the Bible talks about in prophecy to be fulfilled as well. Which means that fallen immortals, the fallen, the satanics, fallen angels, they are going to be revealing themselves more and more as time goes on. The bindings are weakening. That which has restrained these immortals is starting to dissolve, and they will begin to show themselves more frequently. As they do so, so will the heavenly creatures and angelic people. We will begin to see more of them as well, is the way the Bible tells it. And folks, I believe the Bible. I just don't believe that there are any aliens from distant star systems entering our airspace and interacting with us. Now, you will notice from our history, now we have to read the Bible of creation, our actual history, as well as just the written Bible, in order to get the full picture. And you will notice from our history that we're not having a whole lot of gods showing up and introducing themselves to our civilization, flying down in little hovercraft or whatever kind of craft they may have. But we did in ancient ages. And what I want to point out is that in ancient times, all over the world, ancient civilizations reported that they had encountered people that claimed to be gods. There's your first red flag right there. And these people came in some type of a flying craft. Now, the ancient civilizations reported flying mansions, they reported flying carriages, flying carpets, flying rocks, flying chariots. Numerous, from various ancient civilizations, people reported seeing all of these different types of flying craft. In ancient times, they had no problem distinguishing between an inanimate flying ship, craft, chariot, mansion, carriage, whatever, between that and a living creature. That's why they called them flying carriages, flying chariots, flying mountains, flying mansions. Only the prophets of the Bible, and the Bible is not at all ambiguous. Every single prophet, and these things appeared, the Zoon appeared with God or the angels to numerous prophets, and not a single prophet among all those prophets said, you know, I think it looked a little more like a flying ship, or a flying mansion, or a flying craft, or a flying rock, or a flying carriage, or carpet, or whatever. Not a single prophet broke from the norm in stating that the Zoon were flying living creatures, flying animals. They could alter their shape and did so often in order to perform tasks for God, specific tasks that God would have them do, and all of a sudden a hand would appear on their wing, and all of a sudden they would begin to speak. They can speak our language. So these are flying animals. They are not misinterpreted flying machines. And I do not agree with the Eric von Däniken notion that Moses encountered a spaceman in a spaceship from a distant planet on Mount Sinai. That is the postulation of the alien hunters. And make no mistake about it, my friends, the ancient alien phenomenon is becoming a religion very fast. And Paul and Jesus, the Apostle Paul and Jesus, warned us to avoid overly complex doctrines, and that is what the alien hunters have created. It's become a very overly complex doctrine because they are trying to relate it to too many things. Now, if we stay with the biblical perspective on UFOs and unidentified things in our skies, it doesn't become extremely complex. In fact, things begin to fall into two fairly specific categories if you pay attention to the eyewitness accounts. And that's what most interests me, are eyewitnesses. Moses did not encounter a spaceman in a spacesuit with a spaceship on Mount Sinai. Moses encountered the physical manifestation, the physical presence of the Almighty God of the cosmos. And now there is proof of that in the Bible. The problem with a lot of scientists trying to use the Bible to validate their theories, and vice versa. Biblical scholars trying to relate to science. The problem is you have a whole lot of pretty good scientists that know absolutely nothing, and certainly not enough to make any type of theories about the Bible. And then you have Bible scholars that don't know very much about science. So the twain never meet. There's always this separation. We've got to blend these two things, or we will never get our facts straight. But now, the Bible, these flying animals, living creatures, they are described as appearing in various shapes in the Bible. Sometimes they are winged, sometimes they have the heads of animals, sometimes they have the heads of man, sometimes they appear as ovals or round-shaped creatures, and these could be separate species. We just don't know. When a species can alter its shape into virtually any shape, and they can shape living things, which means that inanimate objects, to shape a flying disc or something of that nature, for these creatures that can actually alter themselves at the molecular, possibly at the atomic level, a flying disc would be like asking Rembrandt to draw a stick figure. It's very simple construct compared to a living creature, which they can appear as a man, they can appear as an eagle, an ox, a ram, many things. They can alter their shape. So we're looking at some very, very amazing creatures here, my friends, and they've been around a very long time. Now, God and the angelic beings, they can ride in or on these creatures, and they will continue to do so, and we'll be seeing this going forward. They perform tasks for God, which often require them to alter their shape. They convey prophecy. They speak our language. They are highly intelligent. They display the ability of smoke, luminosity, and this is normally used for camouflage. Even among benevolent creatures, God keeps mortal and immortal separate, and they are not supposed to reveal themselves to us under the sun. Now, so what we usually see of them is either light, which they can project an immense amount of light. They can appear as a twinkling star just hovering up in the sky, and then all of a sudden the star starts skipping around and then shoots out of sight almost vertically straight up. That's going to be one of the angelic creatures, my friends. That's not a craft. That's not any type of a solid craft. Most notably, these creatures fly like nothing else in all creation. They are the masters of the skies, and they can fly at extremely high velocity. As I said, they've appeared as multi-wing, they've appeared as oval, they've appeared as wheels within wheels type of a construct, but it really doesn't matter. We can't judge much of anything by what we see with regard to these creatures because of their ability to alter their shape. They can fly at ultrasonic and even intradimensional speeds that defy visual tracking and leave no trace or condensation cloud You know, even if a solid object climbed out faster than the eye could see, I mean just instantly disappeared, if it was a solid object in our airspace, instantly a condensation cloud would just, boom, just appear. You know, it wouldn't necessarily be a streamer behind a craft because it's moving so fast we can't even follow it with the eye, but that condensation cloud would appear. That's simple physics, my friends. You can't get around the laws of physics unless you're not all the way in our space-time or something. You would have to be, you would have to phase out of our dimension in order to travel that fast and not apply the laws of physics, like the fact that anything moving that fast heats up the air. The heated air causes the moisture in the air to condense, and there you go. You have your condensation cloud. Other than external sound, you don't hear anything, but people have experienced them fairly close up. There is a story of a fellow that experienced a UFO that I think was a creature, and it was just the other side of his car. He was on one side of the car, he had bailed out on that side, and the creature was basically on the other side. And as it flew off, he said that he felt warmth from it and he could hear the air flowing over its body. But once it achieved altitude, he could hear no sound whatsoever. So if you were close enough to a Zoe, just like a bird, if you're close enough, you can hear their wings beating against the air. But once they're up in the sky, you don't hear their wings because, you know, there really is very little sound being made. A Zoe, you could hear the wind flowing over its body if it was flying close to you. You could feel the heat from its body. But once it got up in the sky, you would not hear any mechanical sounds or anything. They leave no radiation signature. In fact, a Zoe is basically, they are the archangels of the animal kingdom. They are life incarnate. So the Zoe do no harm to living things on this earth. In fact, they are our fellow stewards, and they are protectors of the living things of this earth, just like we should be, but we're a little bit of a different type being, and at the moment we're in a mortal state. We are fallen beings, and so we are not quite as benevolent as these creatures are. What it comes down to, if you get away from that overly complex doctrine, things fall, if you watch the evidence, they fall fairly simply into two categories. And we're going to look at those categories, and I'll call one the light category and one the dark category. In the light category, we have living creatures that fly, and they fly silently. In the dark category, we have actual advanced mechanical craft that fly, and they do make various sounds. There is about an equal number of eyewitness reports that report sound versus eyewitness reports that report silence. And various sounds are reported, high humming sounds, even sounds like a washing machine or some type of a whirling dervish sound, but many of these craft that appear more solid do emit sound, whereas the more enigmatic sightings, where they are flying in ways that is just impossible to believe almost, and whatnot, skipping, disappearing, and reappearing, these tend to be silent. In the light category, the living creatures leave no residue, no radiation signature, no scorched earth. On the other category, these mechanical craft, unidentified, many times they will come back and find a radiation signature. They will find scorched earth, a heat signature. In the light category, these creatures, the heavenly creatures, they alter their shape. You cannot count on seeing the same shape twice. And just recently I went online to try and pull up some of the most recent footage of UFO sightings, and the very first one I pulled up, broad daylight, beautiful HD camera, and this fellow that took the photo or took the footage is a dedicated ufologist, and he was absolutely flabbergasted because it was very obvious on this footage that this thing came out of the sky, right over the mountains, green piney woods background, a white oval looking shape that then elongated, and then it shortened, and then it segmented into several different little segments, and then those segments shortened back into an oval shape, and then it disappeared behind the mountains. So this ufologist was just amazed that this, whatever he had caught on camera, was literally changing its shape as it flew, and it was totally silent, as usual with that when that occurs, when that's the phenomenon that you see. On the other hand, in the other category, many sightings are of clearly solid objects. They report domes, even domes where they can see some type of creatures inside. There have been reports of windows, seams, rivets, struts, things of this nature. Now, all of those things could be created and shaped by the Zoi. But from the evidence that I have seen, generally the Zoi, they don't go to that extent to try and camouflage themselves. They'll look like a ball of light, or they'll look like an oval, or they'll look like a cigar-shaped object, but they don't normally go to the trouble of adding such detail as seams and windows and struts and rivets and things of this nature. In the light category, the heavenly creatures fly ultra fast. Again, so fast that they truly must be flying interdimensionally. And you notice that they generally tend to fly straight up. I think they're simply climbing up to the heavenly dimension and disappearing into another dimension. In the other category, these mechanical craft fly very, very fast. But very often, when you hear a high hum, when you can see that it clearly appears to be a solid object, oftentimes they will disappear over the horizon. They do not just climb out like a twinkling star that all of a sudden shoots straight upward and disappears. They will disappear over the horizon and then be seen in the next county in a mere 20 seconds. And then in another 15 seconds, they're seen in the next county. So they fly very fast, but not ultra fast, not interdimensionally fast. Then we come to where the categories really start to separate and are glaringly different. And on the one hand, the light category, the Zoi do no harm to life. As we have discussed, they're basically life incarnate, and they are our allies, benevolent, and do no harm to the life of this world. On the other hand, in the other category, many of these mechanical craft are toxic, they're dangerous, they emit radiation, they emit fire, they emit heat. Eyewitnesses have been scorched, they have been burned, they have experienced radiation sickness after experiencing some of these craft. So we've got two obviously different categories. And you know, I called the little disc-shaped craft that crash experimental in the last module, but they're not necessarily experimental. You know, the fallen, the satanics, those who are actually manufacturing these things, these fallen, they do not answer to OSHA. They are under no FAA guidelines. Those craft that were crashing so often back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were not necessarily experimental craft, they were just damned unstable, you know, and they didn't care that some of their little gray creatures were killed in the crashes. That was the state of their aeronautical technology at the time, and they were somewhat unstable. Evidently they've stabilized. We're not having a lot of crashes nowadays, but back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were crashing all over the world, which means they were not from distant star systems. They were something unknown with flying craft that were unstable. And evidently they've done enough experimentation now to stabilize them, because like I say, we don't have a lot of crashes anymore. Most of them occurred back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So the fallen immortals, as far as creating new technology, They're on a learning curve themselves. There probably were not a lot of aeronautical engineers and metallurgists that followed Lucifer in the first age and were exiled and are now fallen immortals. So they've had to develop their own technology, and I pointed out earlier that we don't see any of these craft coming down from the sky with people in them claiming to be gods anymore. For one reason for that, I am sure, is that if these immortals want to use the highly advanced craft that they brought with them from the prior age, those things are 10, 15,000 years old now. If they want to use them during the end times, when they become more active and actually reveal themselves on earth, they will have had to have dry docked them and kept them maintained and dry docked all these centuries and centuries, because everything, I don't care what it's made of, everything in the physical realm tends to age, will deteriorate with time. And where are they going to get spare parts for a highly advanced flying craft that the manufacturing and all of that no longer exists? You know, that's going to be a problem for them, and they are dealing with it by manufacturing new crops, new things. Now, the Zoe do no harm to life. The fallen are extremely toxic, extremely dangerous. The Zoe can sparkle and hover. On the other category, they've had craft that are so unstable that they crash all over the world. They can't climb out of this atmosphere in the blink of an eye. No way. On the one hand, we have these beautiful, symmetrical, lovely, perfect, that do convey a message, crop formations. That's from, in my opinion, the Zoon. On the other hand, from the fallen, in the other category, we have cattle mutilations. There is evidence going all the way back to ancient times that these fallen that claim to be gods have a need for blood and other resources. They had our ancestors bring them gold, bring them silver, and back in the day, bring them human sacrifices, and they always collect the blood. And now they can't get away with human sacrifice and passing themselves off as gods anymore, or they would have a hard time doing it. So now it's cattle mutilations, and you will note that the blood is always missing in a cattle mutilation situation. Both camps, both the Zoon, the Zoe, and the gray creatures and the fallen immortals that manufacture them, they can all communicate telepathically, evidently. The Zoe have demonstrated the ability to do so, and so have the gray creatures. In the one light category, we've got protection from the Zoe. In the other category, in the dark category, we don't get protection, folks. We get abduction. People are taken in the middle of the night against their will, taken to someplace strange and ominous, and have experiments conducted on their physical bodies and whatnot. The Zoe, we will never get an ID from the Zoe. They will never reveal themselves as to exactly who and what they are. That's why we normally, even when we see them, they are employing some type of camouflage. Either they've altered their shape, or they produce fire and smoke to where you can't even tell what the heck you're looking at, and color and light. But they will never reveal themselves as to exactly what they are. They play by the rules. They abide by the bindings. On the other hand, in the other category, we have various lies from these gray creatures. We've been told every kind of lie in the world about who they are and what they are. Some have claimed to be little subterranean, ancient race of this earth. Some have claimed to be from distant star systems. They claim when people see Nordic human, very regal looking beings in the distance that never actually closely interact with them, these abductees, they are told telepathically by the gray creatures that these are our offspring, these are our breeding experiments. We breed our people with your people, and we come up with these Nordic and Assyric looking humans we cannot trust one word or one impression that comes to our minds from these gray creatures. The Nordics are the overlords. They're the ancient ones. They're the bosses. They're the ones doing the genetic engineering and calling the shots. And it is the grays that are the offspring that are being genetically engineered. And there aren't any Nordic or Assyric offspring of the grays that they're breeding. Now the Zoon, the Zoi, they have a playful nature. They are heavenly creatures. They are animals, and very much like dogs and cats and horses and every animal on earth, especially when they are young, they are very playful. They are very positive in nature. On the other category, there are people that see the craft of the fallen, these fallen craft that do make a humming sound and are involved in abductions, and people see them appear on the horizon, and it's one of those moments like, I think Star Wars is the movie I can think of where very often they said, I've got a bad feeling about this. Well, that's how people often react on first sight of seeing some of these fallen craft. They are ominous. They feel wicked. They are not to be trifled with. Whereas people have seen what apparently were young, living Zoon in a field and felt no wickedness, no ominous feeling from them. Farmer walks right out in the field, right toward them, said they looked. This is very telling and very interesting. The top half of these creatures, and they were all about the size of a Volkswagen, looked very mechanical. The bottom half of them looked organic, like an animal, and there was some exchange going on between the earth and the creatures. Either they were drawing something from the earth or depositing something onto the earth. Who knows? Maybe it was a restroom stop. But the farmer walks out in the field. When he gets about 50 feet from them, 50 yards from them, it's as if they all were aware of him at the same time, and they all just flew off very quickly. And he looked up then, and for the first time, he said he might not have entered the field if he'd have looked up first, because when he looked up, he saw something very huge up in the sky, and all the little ones went up there and either flew into it or attached onto it. He couldn't tell which, but they disappeared into this large, much larger creature, and then that creature tipped and went straight up silently and disappeared. That's a fairly typical sighting of the Zoon. They are our greatest ally, so they do not feel wicked. You don't get an ominous feeling from them. On the other hand, in the other category, when people see these craft, certainly if they've been abducted, they know that in the other category, these are not our allies. They are not our ancient forefathers that seeded us here and are helping us along to become a higher form of life. No, they're our worst enemy. They want this world, and they want to take it from us. Now, I'm trying to achieve closure with this. I feel like at Rendlesham Forest, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, what was going on in Rendlesham Forest, that was a nuclear facility. And 2 or 3 nights, they were seeing lights out in the forest. Something was snooping around that nuclear facility. And when Jim and John were dispatched, they entered the forest. And right as they entered the forest, there was a huge flash of light and a shock wave that actually brought some of the soldiers that were hanging back down to a knee. You know, they had to steady themselves and stand back up. And then when John and Jim entered the clearing of the forest, they found a single triangular shaped object. When Jim touched it, he said it felt warm and it felt like skin. And there were no lights, switches, buttons, anything, windows, anything like that. There were some hieroglyphic shapes on the outside, which was probably part of the camouflage, probably part of the shape that was assumed by the creature. But he said also there was light and undulation and color subcutaneously underneath the surface of whatever he was touching, and then the thing made telepathic contact with him, lifted up and flew away, straight up and silently. Now, something had been lurking around that nuclear facility, and I think on the third night, a Zoe was dispatched, or one of the nights, a living creature from heaven was dispatched. About the second or third night, I'm not sure which, and it battled whatever craft was lurking around this nuclear facility and was probably going to breach the security on the final night that it came there. But the Zoe defeated it, dispatched it, ran it off, destroyed it, who knows what. Dispatched the wicked craft, communicated with our military, which was Jim Penniston, left us a little message, little encoded message, telepathically, protected our nuclear base, communicated with our military, and left, and was never seen again in Rendlesham Forest. Now, it wasn't too long after that that another living creature, in my opinion, it was projecting pure light, appeared over Malmstrom Air Force Base. And it hovered like a star, and then it moved, and then it would hover. But the main thing that occurred was that it took absolute control of our nuclear missile base and systematically, one by one, made sure that it could, at will, and anytime it wanted to, shut down those nuclear missiles, shut down our nukes. And that's exactly what it did. It took control, it got everybody's attention. Everyone was wondering what it was, trying to analyze it, trying to watch it, and all of a sudden it took control of that nuclear facility and systematically shut down every single one of our nukes. And once it did that, it was a training mission. This was reconnaissance. This Zoe showed up to test its ability and just make sure, a little practice session, make sure that if needed, it could fly down to one of these nuclear facilities and shut down those nukes in a heartbeat. There is very clear evidence in the Bible that heaven and the angels know exactly what nuclear missiles are, and they are called in the Bible the very scourge of this world. They are one thing that can destroy entire civilizations. And the angel that was talking with Zechariah showed him a nuclear missile and told him how destructive and evil they are. And he told him that they are the scourge of this world. And he told him the one that he was looking at would eventually, he was seeing the future, and that it would eventually end up on its base in the land of Shinar, which is Iran. These are our greatest allies, the Zoon. The creatures that fly around in unknown craft, unless they are experimental man-made craft, and that cannot account for all of the sightings, my friends. They are our worst enemies. They are basically our only great enemy on this world. Zoon are highly intelligent, sophisticated, multi-talented flying animals of heaven. The Bible speaks of them extensively. Evidence from the secular world also confirms and indicates that either the heavenly zoo or the undiscovered mortal zoo is very natural. It's native to this earth. It's not from some distant star system. And all of the creatures appear to breed. There are small ones, there are large ones, there are ones that seem to get into mischief and do a lot of playing around, and then there are larger ones that seem to always be on a mission of some kind. What we can take away from this is that there are biblical explanations for many of these phenomena that hold far more water, especially in view of the Bible and the secular evidence, than the alien hunters and other UFO theories. Those theories are all based on spaceman talking to Moses on Mount Sinai. My friends, that is not the truth. So I just needed to clear that up and get some clarity and some closure on the UFO phenomenon. But we have to cover these subjects because, you know, the Bible is connected. Some of the strangest things that are stranger than fiction are actually very much connected to the Bible. So we have to cover these subjects. There's nothing wrong with studying the facts and studying the evidence and being a ufologist, being interested in UFOs. Not a thing wrong with it. But just be very careful of pet theories. Especially, listen folks, they have so-called Bible experts on some of these documentaries that misrepresent the Bible in order to make it fit their theory. So don't go with that, folks. Let's keep our philosophies biblically founded, our theories harmonious with the Bible, not with some secular doctrine. I hope you got a little closure on the UFO issue. Thank you, folks. Hello, folks. I just wanted to add a quick caveat to this video, just in case, God forbid, anyone watched this video and it planted the seeds of doubt as to perhaps maybe the alien hunters and Eric von Däniken were right, and Moses did encounter a spaceman in a spaceship on Mount Sinai. That is not correct, and there are many reasons why, but the most glaring is that these other gods, all the ancient beings that came from the sky and were mistaken for gods or claimed to be gods, none of them have the adequate witness that the Bible states is absolutely imperative for validating honesty in ancient reporting or any other matter. The ancient beings that came down, they accepted worship, they accepted resources, often they even accepted human sacrifices. They were here today, they were gone tomorrow. Even some of their civilizations, of which they were the gods, have disappeared. Now, the God of Moses, on the other hand, had other sky beings, others that came from the sky and also fly, and that were not astronauts. They're actually angels, archangels, named archangels. Angels like Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, all of whom attested to the fact that God is God, not an ancient astronaut or spaceman with a spaceship from another planet. Also, we have an entire canon of mortal adequate witnesses spanning over 2,000 years, numerous eyewitness accounts of encounters with the Almighty God. And our God always corrected us when we were worshiping the wrong things, very often. This is not true of the ancient beings that came from our skies and interacted with our ancient forefathers. And Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, the archangels, attested to the fact that God is the one true God, and they said that they worship the same God that we worship. And they attested to the fact that we are not to worship them, that they themselves were not gods. They are angels, archangels, in the case of Michael and Gabriel. And they are our fellow beings, though much older, I'm sure, as archangels. And as archangels, they probably do originally come from a distant star system. I would lay money that Michael and Gabriel, Raphael, originally had their beginnings in a distant star system in the Pleiades. There's evidence in the Bible that Lucifer may be from the Orion star system originally. But since they have been on this earth longer than we have, we can hardly refer to them as aliens, and it is inappropriate to refer to them as astronauts. They're not astronauts that fly around in spaceships in our physical space. They are angels from a higher dimension, archangels actually, and again, they attest to the fact that God is God, not an astronaut from a spaceship. They say that he is the almighty creator of the cosmos. Now, I come down hard sometimes on the alien hunters, but you know, Eric von Däniken and Giorgio Tsoukalos, and they have a right to interpret the facts of history any way they want to. Eric was actually correct in many of his assumptions that, for instance, the ancient mythology of our ancestors is not their version of science fiction or cheap fantasy novels. Back in the day, in ancient times, they did not write down frivolous things. There were no trashy romance novels circulating around. There were no little cheap science fiction novels circulating around. 90% of what archaeology has uncovered as writings from ancient times, these very ancient civilizations, are things like receipts, shipping manifests, mortgages, written agreements and contracts, things that of a very practical and necessary nature. Writing back then was too difficult, too time-consuming, and too expensive to be writing down things that were just strictly flights of fantasy. And so what they wrote down were things that were based on fact. Now, no doubt many of them are embellished, but we have pointed out, I pointed out in the trilogy, The Story Behind the Bible, that even the Greek gods of Mount Olympus had an origin in actual historical fact with the sons of Israel. So, you know, Eric was correct in many of his assessments. And I will say one thing about the alien hunters: at least they're hunting. At least they have their eyes on the horizon and they're paying attention. They're not just, you know, obliviously walking around living in the moment like so many people today, you know, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. No, at least the alien hunters are hunting and they're paying attention. And one of the great things that they have done, many, many years before Eric ever wrote his book, I was sitting in Sunday school classes discussing the possibility that ancient mythology was influenced by space travelers, people from other worlds or something. You know, we didn't know. And for centuries, biblical scholars have been looking at all of these megalithic sites and enigmatic sites all around the world and trying to figure out what was going on. We were the original hunters, but we biblical scholars have been looking through old books and manuscripts at old grainy black and white photographs and stuff of these sites all over the world, and kind of squinting our eyes trying to look at them and postulate and figure them out. The alien hunters have brought all of these things right into our living rooms in beautiful widescreen HD, to where we can look at them and see exactly what they really look like and assess the evidence for ourselves. But I just wanted to make sure that, God forbid, no one watched this video and had it plant the seeds of doubt in that maybe Eric is right, maybe Moses did talk to a spaceman with a spaceship. No, Eric is not a Christian. Now, he's a pretty good author, and a lot of his assessments were true. A lot of Giorgio Tsoukalos' statements are absolutely true. People weren't writing down pure flights of fantasy back in ancient times. They wrote down things that were based on fact. Embellished, yeah, sure, probably, but there's a very large difference between the God of the Bible and all of these other ancient gods that did accept worship. They did accept resources, even human sacrifice sometimes. So I just didn't want anyone to have that doubt. I wanted to put this little caveat onto our UFO video, and just everyone, don't have any doubts. This Bible has multiple mortal eyewitnesses to God over the course of 2,000 years. God was with Israel day in and day out for 40 years ongoing. So it's a totally different set of facts and circumstances. And what I do have a particular problem with are the so-called biblical experts on some of these documentaries that just actually do misrepresent the Bible in order to make it fit their theories. Now, there's one fellow with white collar and all that refers to God as an astronaut in a spaceship from a distant planet. Now, that man is not a Christian. Not really. He's a poser. He either misrepresents the Bible or he just flat doesn't know the Bible. He hasn't done his homework. So I just wanted to clear that up. Have no doubts that God is very, very different. Jehovah is very different from all of the ancient beings that showed up and were mistaken for gods or claimed to be gods. Remember, the God of Moses has multiple mortal adequate witnesses as well as sky beings that witness to the fact that God is the one true God and the almighty creator of the cosmos. And they attest to the fact that they are not gods. They are not to be worshipped. That they themselves worship the exact same God that we are to worship, and that we are not to worship them, we are to worship Him, the Almighty God, Yahweh, that they too worship. So hopefully that clears up any doubts that may have been seeded from this video, and I will end it there, and God bless all the watchmen and all they watch, and we'll see you next time.